Hi everybody, so I'm David Trigger-Joe. I work for Nikki Clements and I head up our People Analytics and Employee Insights team. And that's kind of sort of traditionally where this team came from was somebody who administered our Employee Insights and then very, very separately 6 data scientists who we're very lucky at Unilever. We have another team that do a lot of our reporting and a lot of our data management. And so these data scientists' job was really to kind of explore what we had and really focus on what we could do in the more predictive space. So what I wanted to talk to you today about was Employee Insights, and it should say more simple, which is just horrible language, but which is what our CHRO actually wrote for our strategy, but I thought I'd stick to something a bit more grammatically correct, more impactful and more human. So kind of to set the context, I'm sure you all know about Unilever, huge number of different brands, but what I really wanted to just give you a bit of context on was, well, who are we trying to get insights from? And there's roughly 150,000 people that work for us. And that is in everything from kind of traditional office staff through to startups that we've kind of acquired, so people like Dollar Shave Club who operate quite differently, through to people working in our factories, and even to people still working on things like tea plantations in India and in Africa. So a really diverse group of people that we are trying to drive insights from. So why more simple, more impactful, and more human? Well, this is actually our HR strategy, which is all around, we have a very strong belief that people with purpose thrive. And actually, part of my team is doing a big randomized control trial at the moment to prove that. So that's a big part of what we do, is trying to prove the impact of stuff. And the way we think about people with purpose thrive is we want to focus on making things as simple as possible for our employees. So every way they interact with HR, how can we make it simpler? How can that, that policy be simpler, that process be simpler? How do we really drive out complexity everywhere? The second one is, how can we make sure we have the most impact? And so that's not about just saying, this thing looks like it has a lot of impact. What's the thing that's going to give the biggest impact to the business? And a bit like measuring purpose, my team do a huge amount of work on that, on everything from like predictive attrition through to randomized control trials, through to even like assessing new AI and machine learning tools that the company wants to introduce to make sure they actually do what they say they do. And then finally, more human. And I think, we heard this morning, Nikki talked about unstereotype, Al talked about it's about the people, and we're really, really passionate about the fact that, we have 150,000 people working for us, right? This isn't all about AI and machine learning and numbers. There are real people there, and we want to treat everyone in a compassionate and supportive manner and help everyone to achieve what they can achieve. So the reason I kind of brought this up is because I think it's actually a good way of talking through our journey in people insights and in trying to understand more about our people. So where did we start from? Well, we kind of started from the same place most people start from, right? We had a fantastic annual survey run by a third-party provider for us, unbelievably detailed, the kind of thing that pops up and says you're on page 1 of 10, and every single question has been pored over for years and years and years to make it exactly 22 words that describe exactly what we're after. Like I said, once a year. Between those times, we don't really care, but once a year, let's do it great. Very heavily structured, so very much about what the business wanted to hear, not necessarily what you want to tell us. And fantastic comprehensive reporting, like reporting you can't imagine. And I was a line manager and I used to get, the fantastic 90-page deck where you say, superb, but where's the insight? But, thanks for all the charts and all the graphs. So it kind of worked, but we had a lot of people in the business saying, this is nuts. Every year we go through this crazy massive event where we get the whole of HR pushing this thing. We get, and it consumes us. We want something simpler. So we started our journey on, if you like, really the front end. How can we really simplify our employees' experience with this and get us a lot more insight out of what we're doing? So the very first thing we did was really to say, we need to be much more flexible here. We still want that deep annual survey, but it's not good enough to not then listen for the rest of the year. So what we decided to do was the annual survey, rather than surveying absolutely everyone, we took some, tools and techniques from our marketing colleagues and said, we're going to use a statistically significant sample instead for that. So we tend to go for about between 30 and 40% of the population for that survey, which means we can still give significant results down to individual countries, departments, those kind of things. But it means it's no longer this massive everybody survey. But that feels like you're missing out, right? Because Employee Insights isn't just about listening, it's about engaging as well. So what we do with everybody else is we give them an opportunity to answer the questions throughout the year. And that's how we do our kind of continuous listening mode. So we're catching both pieces. And even more importantly, our factory colleagues had always said, this is a nightmare. For us, not everybody even has a computer. This is paper-based. You come and do it to us all at the same time, which is often like the worst time of the year. It might be peak ice cream season somewhere, or it could be the time the factory's down. So we said to factories, that's fine. As long as you do it once in the year, we don't care when you do it. But you do it, and you do it with us. And that's worked quite well for us. What we also did was we said, these kind of long surveys ain't going to work anymore. So we halved the question set, we simplified the questions, and we got a survey, and we do measure it. It takes the average person less than 2 minutes to complete our annual survey. So actually 1 minute, 58 seconds. And for our pulse survey, we got the average question length down to 4 words. And there are 8 questions. And that was because we moved away from a kind of, do you agree with this statement, to just very simple things like senior leadership, 1 to 5 stars. Line manager, 1 to 5 stars. Really, really fast. So people are able to do the pulse survey in like less than, actually, they spend about 1:30 on it still, because we do ask some verbatim questions, but these things are fast. And so for talking to our senior leaders, the impact of doing this stuff dramatically reduced. Third thing we did was we said, the level of flexibility we want now ain't gonna work with a third-party provider. We cannot experiment as much as we want. We also can't have all the factories just popping up and saying they want to do it whenever if we're using a third-party provider. So we decided instead to bring the whole thing in-house. And we buy a tool, but we don't buy any consulting or anything else off it. We don't even use the tool, the questions that come with the tool. Everything is in-house. And that sounds like a crazy big undertaking, right? We have one person that administers it. It's actually not that complicated. And then we use a group of individuals around the world. Nikki talked about kind of our expanded team who pop up at the right times of the year to support us to do this and then disperse again. And with this one tool, the way we got the business case to work was, number one, it was cheaper than having a provider. But number two, we also said, we want to do all the surveys in it because it's now ours. So when the legal team came to us and asked us to do said they were going to go and spend a whole load of money on an ethics questionnaire survey, we did it all in-house. We took the questions from the third-party provider, did it in-house, saved them a load of money, and brilliantly, all the data from that poured into our data warehouse, because that was the other big change we made in simplifying, which is we went to a confidential survey, which meant that whilst we never report in groups of less than 8, every single survey we do, actually, the results can now be crossed with all the other data that we hold on our employees, everything from performance to demographics to everything else. So the ability to data mine this became massive, but also we could pull off some nice party tricks. So, we were at the senior leadership meeting playing back all this stuff, and one of the people said, I've just been doing a cross-divisional initiative where we've been putting a few people through a workshop, and I'd love to know if they thought Agile was getting better or not. We said, yeah, sure. So he gave us the list of all the people that had been on the course, about 400 people, and within 30 minutes, we gave him back the results cut in that way. We didn't know that before we started, but because we've got all the results tagged, we can recut the groups however we want. Brilliant when you have that reorg a month after you've just done your survey and someone says, well, these results are rubbish. No. This is what everybody that's coming to your team already thinks. This is what you're starting with, because we can actually recut it to fit the new org. And we can generate history. So that person that tells you, no, I can't do the history from last year because it's a totally different org. Oh, no. We can recut the results for the previous years to regenerate the history as well. So that was kind of our more simple piece. And then we thought about, well, how can we get also around being more simple, that impact that we want? And some of the impact comes simply from moving from kind of fully anonymous to confidential and being able to do the analysis ourselves. But this was a 2-year journey. And in year 1, really where we started was still in the data space and in the space of doing descriptive analytics on top of it. So the same stuff you get from most providers, kind of, the charts, you should look over here piece, but not a huge amount more than that. And as I said at the beginning, my team was kind of 2 halves. We had this employee insights specialist, and we had a whole load of data scientists. I said, this seems crazy, right? The data scientists are really, really lucky because some genius 8 years ago started taking like monthly snapshots of our PeopleSoft and then our Workday environment. So I've got superb historic data on things like performance, job moves, you name it. And they've been doing loads of great work on that. And we've now got fantastic employee insights data that is tagged with employee ID, so we can merge all this stuff. And this feels like it's actually a data problem, right? It doesn't feel like it's just a kind of run a survey. It feels like there's something here we can do. So what we decided to do this year, well, last year now, was that when the survey closed, I wanted to get those data scientists in working for a week on the data. And we decided 1 week was enough, because these things can go on forever, right? So we kept ourselves honest by putting a meeting in with Lena Nair, our CHRO, 8 a.m., 1 week after the survey closed, and told her we'd have all the results, including all the insights by then. So we had to nail that. And then we got the data scientists did a load of prep work up front, and we brought them in to start playing with the data. But what concerned me about that was like the hopelessly global thing, right? I mean, we've all done it. You know, you get a bunch of data scientists in a room, you get a bunch of data in a room, and they run off and find amazing things. But actually, it was like, well, yeah, we already knew that, or that's nice, but what we really cared about was over here. So what we wanted to do was make sure we had enough like local knowledge to really drive where should we look. And so one of the things that Nikki does, which is absolutely genius, is our local colleagues don't have a large travel budgets, obviously, because they're kind of not supposed to be flying around the world. So what we do is we save a massive portion of our travel budget to fly them to us instead. And so for that week, what we did was we flew 6 people in from across our business to come and sit with the data scientists and our employee insight specialist. And we actually brought in as well 2 startups that were desperate to work with us. So we paid them a tiny bit of money to come in for like 3 days and just work with us and show us what they could do on our data. And off the back of this, we got a whole range of insights. So, you know, some of the ones that I really loved was there was one where we looked at, is it the case, or which dimension should you do action planning on? Because, like, I'm sure everyone here works in companies that are very matrixed, right? So, you know, I work in HR, the UK business, I have a relationship with this division, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, my line manager's gonna action plan on my results. But then if you're not careful, you get like 6 different emails and invited to like 10 different things to action plan with every single kind of dimension around you. And what we wanted to do was say, well, which dimension really matters? And so we looked at where does the variation in the results come from? And it was really, really clear. It was your local market. So we were able to go back to HR and say, as part of being simple, everyone else step back. Let the markets do the action planning. Go on one dimension. Don't have everybody trying to run over the top of them. We also did some work on looking at, is it business performance that drives great results? Because the thing we always get told is, yeah, of course that market and that market got great results because they had a great year in sales and and everybody's happy, and that's the case. And what was really interesting is, it's true. But it's only true for about 5 out of our 25 questions. The other ones don't correlate it with it at all. And in actual fact, you could really see in some of the questions that the real impact was around, like, what was the quality of leadership? So we were able to go back and say, yeah, on these ones, you guys are kind of right. You should give yourself a bit of a free pass because your performance was bad. Although it only accounted for about 30–40% of it, so there was still room for maneuver. But on these, no excuse, guys. These are the ones that you can focus on, that you can really drive some performance change on. So some really interesting stuff started coming out like that, and we saw some brilliant things where you'd have a local person say, I really care about X, and a data scientist say, okay, let's have a quick look together. And then very quickly look through it, we ran the whole thing off a Kanban, and then decide, nah, there's nothing there, and kill it straight away, or dig into it. Meaning that we had a whole set of insights. And so I wanted to show you one of them. So this was something one of the startups did for us. Really cool, right? You know, like lots of points moving around on the screen. And I think it's going to appear in a minute, but this group here was a really interesting group. They scored like 4 on every question, 4 or 5 on every question, and then on one question, whatever they were level at, kind of flat, they dropped. I went, oh yeah, that's interesting. Great, thanks for that. And the local person said, oh, that's kind of interesting because actually that's something we sort of care about. So, okay, great. So we now know there's a demographic group that drop in that space in this market. Brilliant. But I think with a lot of analytics, if we're not careful, they're special effects, right? That's a great special effect, But actually it doesn't really tell you anything, And the furthest we got with that was really a local person saying, yeah, we know there's a problem there. Congratulations, you found it in the data. And we wouldn't have found it any other way. But what we really needed was something beyond the insight. What I really needed to do was be able to tell people the story behind that insight. What is really driving that? And so the big thing we've kind of learned was what we traditionally do is we ask people the questions we want answered. And what we wanted to do was let people answer the questions they wish we'd asked. And so for us, this was about trying to become more human, really listen to the people rather than saying, hey, yeah, I know you care about that, but I care about understanding this over here. And so after quite a bit of experimentation, we came up with 3 questions. I say came up, we basically nicked them from Glassdoor, but they really, really work. And the order is super important. And what we find happens is when you ask like this, you get wonderful stuff back. People really love working at Unilever, and you get some fabulous pros that come out. Okay, you get some pros from people that you think, really? But in the general, you get some really good stuff, and you get a great understanding up here, actually, about a lot of what's good about your culture. Then you ask people, go on then, give it to me with both barrels in the cons, and they absolutely do. And you really get to see what people really dislike about working at the company, and some of it is, horrific, and others of it is kind of in the middle, and some of it is things like, yeah, it'd be great if, you could fire David, Fred, and Ginger, then we'd be sorted. And then something really beautiful happens is you ask people, okay, well, what would you do about it? What would you want management to do? And this stuff is unbelievably constructive. I mean, okay, 20% of it is still fire those 3 people, but the other 80%, people really take time. And I'm not talking here 3 or 4 words. I'm talking people spend time to give us sentences. People give us 3 or 4 bullet points. We get really detailed stuff on what people want to do. But I just asked 26,000 people to answer these questions, right? Actually, it was more than that, but 26,000 people replied. That's a huge amount of data. How on earth do you find anything in that kind of level of information? And I think you kind of probably all know what punchline is, but being more human at scale means not using a human, actually, right? It means using some natural language processing. And so a key requirement for us in the tool we bought was that it had to be able to do natural language processing. And that the critical things for us were, we wanted some topic extraction, and we wanted some sentiment analysis. And on topic extraction, what really surprised us, and if you guys are in the market for these kind of tools, I'd definitely ask this question, was the number of tools that told us they would give us back the key topic in the comment. And we know people write up to a page on some of these things, right? That's more than one topic. So one of the key things that we got in our tool, which we're very happy about, is that actually it gives us the dominant topic and it gives us all the other topics, and it tells us how equal they were within the comment that we get back. So we get a really good understanding of everything the person's talking about. And then sentiment analysis, I don't really trust it yet. I don't think it's fully accurate, but it gives us a rough indication. And over time and time trends, I believe the errors kind of fall out. So as long as we're not using it on a point, but as long as we're using it to guide us, it kind of works. So how do we use some of this stuff? Well, so here's a great graph, right? What are you taught in physics? Always label your axes. Well, if I did that, I couldn't show you the chart, so I'll tell you what the axes are instead. So this was all our topics. The orange bars are the appearance of that topic in a con, and the green is an appearance of that topic in a pro. And, having split out pros and cons rather than just any other comments, we don't have to worry about the sentiment analysis for telling us what's good and bad. What we actually get straight away is a good view, just grossed up straight away, that there are some topics. Top one was, I think, benefits, where actually you get just as many people thinking it's the greatest thing that ever happened as you do people that are detractors. And we can really dig into that. So we can look at things like, was it that actually all the pros on benefits were our top performing individuals last year, and therefore they loved it, and all the people on the other side were average who didn't get a great bonus? No, not true. Is it about age? Is it about gender? Is it about... And you find out, no, it's not really about any of those things. You've got to dig deeper. You've got to go into the subtopics and look at the sub-demographics to really understand that, hey, you know what, it turns out that women and men in their kind of late 20s to early 30s quite like the change in the maternity and paternity policy. And I'm one of them because this is actually a keep in touch day for me. I'm off work for 8 months looking after my kids at the moment. So that comes through. But then there are some people in that group that we know we haven't touched or we haven't exposed to those policies yet, because we see them talking in the cons about the fact they don't seem to have enough flexibility. So we know exactly where some of the countries need to be playing up some of these benefits or where we need to be looking at pieces. And you also see some where you get a fantastically long green bar and hardly anything in the red. And brilliantly for us, we were very, very happy. That was about our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, where actually people see that as a massive pro. And actually one of the pieces of analysis we did was we were able to demonstrate that the markets that had the highest levels of engagement with our sustainability plan were the markets that were growing the fastest last year. And we were able to show that that just wasn't 1 year, because we've got history now over a few years, that actually that was a relationship that held year on year on year. So, we were able, our board were very, very excited about that one, that actually this stuff really does show up in our results. And it kind of reinforced what we knew from our sales and our brand data as well. So that's our kind of pros and cons, but, there are some where, although it's small, that's quite a big con in comparison to the number of people calling it a pro. And that one was actually cross-team collaboration. And we were really a bit concerned about this because I'd been part of, in my previous job, a massive program to drive cross-team collaboration. So, oh God, this is not looking great for me and Peter. And what we did was we had a quick look at the sentiment on it. And this isn't the sentiment for that one, this is a random one picked. But the funny thing was, most of the comments were optimistic. So although they were putting them in the cons and they were telling us this is something that's not good, they were actually optimistic that something was changing. So that was, for us, a really nice way to be able to start understanding, well, what's the trend behind this? Now, we know it's only about 60% accurate on some of the kind of sentiment. So I can't say, yeah, that's definitely the way it pans out. You have to go and read the comments. And that, for me, is about being more human, is about going and reading the comments and really understanding. But it gives you that good indication. And so it's the kind of thing I would never go in front of our board and say, 62% of people were optimistic about this. But we are able to then say, hey, here's an example comment on cross-team collaboration, and it is actually representative of what most people think, And if you want to come and test me by digging through it all, we can show you what it is. I think the other thing that both this does and the topic extraction does is it doesn't stop you from reading the comments. You can't just ignore the comments. You can't just turn something that is very beautifully qualitative into a set of numbers and then be done. What it does, though, is it massively accelerates and speeds up how quick it is to analyze it. So it's a bit like guided reading, right? We can then read all the comments around a particular topic, and you can understand it rather than trying to pick out the topics as you read through all the comments by a demographic group. So much better to read it this way and have it tagged by which market it came from than reading everything in North America, everything in the UK. I mean, we split it that way for those countries, but at a total level, it gave us a great way to look at it. So that was the pros and the cons. And the other thing was then, well, what's the advice to management look like? Surely that's going to be crazy. It's going to be all over the place, right? Actually, no. So we have quite a long number of topics, I think 60, 70 odd plus topics. 10% of all our advice to management, 70% of all our advice to management is in the top 10 topics, right? And when you go into the subtopics within those, you get a similar kind of relationship, actually. So what it really did was, rather than in the old days, what I used to get was, here's my report, here's the numbers. David, the guys in India hate you. Okay, great. And now I have to go off and run my additional survey, or I go and do that focus group, or I do. No, we kind of break over the whole of that. Because with the pros and the cons, you're able to understand a bit what people were talking about. So the example of that amazing special effect that we looked at earlier, we looked at what did people say in the pros and cons about that, and we were able to really identify for that very small demographic that we'd found, actually, there was probably too much pressure on them, was something that seemed to be coming out in the cons versus other people. And then when you look in the advice to management, do you know what we had? We had like the action plan pretty much written for us because the people had already told us what they wanted to do. So when we went to the board like a week plus 1 day after the survey closed, we actually not only were able to say, here's what your people think, here are some example comments, and by the way, these are really representative examples, but we also put up a slide where we said, and these are the 3+1, because that's how we do planning, 3+1 actions that your people would like you to take. And here's what that means underneath it all. So it wasn't the be-all and end-all, and hey, we still want to do focus groups, and you still want to dive into other things, but it really gave people a toolkit that takes you to the end rather than kind of the end of the survey just being the beginning. I think we brought people on a little bit further. And I can't emphasize enough, huge amount of reading, right? I mean, like, we still read oodles of stuff that week. It was just in a nicer structured way. So what's next? Well, kind of more of the same. So more simple, I would love to be able to just plug into the data exhaust or whatever we call it these days and not have to survey people at all. So my idea of more simple would be, let's not survey, let's just understand and get straight to the insights. But I think we're a little way away from that. But if anyone has any ideas, please come and talk to me. More impactful, we can definitely go further on action planning, and we can we've caught the bug around nudging, just like, I guess, half the HR professionals in the world at the moment. So how do we use this to help us drive nudging out the back? And more human is around, like, how can we drive more engagement through our insights program as well? So not just about taking action, but how do we, for example, start to be able to do more focus groups, but in a virtual way and in a way that scales nicely? And we've been experimenting with a whole range of different technologies in that space. And we've also been experimenting with using much more open source data. So looking at, what do our employees actually say on Glassdoor? Does it correlate with what we find inside? Funny thing is, yes, it does. So if you've got a terrible Glassdoor score and you tell yourself, it's just because it's all the leavers who hate us, that's not what we find. We find actually the external scores actually do correlate quite nicely with our internal scores, and thank God they're quite good. So and using that Glassdoor was actually quite a nice way of making the connection with the board for us, but gave us more impact because our CEO had looked at Glassdoor. So being able to tell him, hey, this stuff is just like Glassdoor, and here's what Glassdoor says, and here's what people internally say, and you know what, it's kind of the same, actually got us an even bigger seat at the table. So that's kind of us. So hopefully that gives you a rough idea of how we've kind of simplified, driven some impact, and become more human in the way we generate employee insights. And now I'm happy to take any questions. I think there's like a mic floating around.
I'll kick us off with one, and then I'm sure people have tons of questions. I love what you're doing with the qualitative analysis, because I do think that employees have so much to share, and oftentimes we put them in the different categories, and so I'm sure they're loving the freedom and the ability to really say what's important. When you run the qualitative analysis, and so I think it was incredible that 70% of the comments go into the top 10. I think it's really telling. How do you then measure change over time? So you identify these 10 areas of advice, and presumably, I don't know if it's in 3 months, 6 months, a year, maybe it depends. But now you have these key areas. Do you do it qualitatively again? Do you do it quantitatively?
Actually, we ask exactly those 3 questions every single month. So those are the same, those 3 questions go into every single survey we do. And so we're able to trend the topics over time. And we're also able to look at like how are the pros increasing? So some of the things that people said was advice to management. Are you seeing that disappear from advice to management and appear as a pro? Are you seeing it disappear from advice to management and just disappear? How's the sentiment changing on some of this stuff? Because although I don't trust sentiment analysis, I do trust it enough to kind of look at the trend. So, is that con starting to turn optimistic or not, is a good way of kind of looking at some of that stuff. The other thing we are experimenting with is actually using this stuff as almost like a review site. So at the moment, only with our CHRO and a few other people, but we've actually built a website where we just expose all of that. And my vision is that as an employee, I ought to be able to look up the fact I'm going to work for Nikki Clement and see what everyone has said about Nikki over the last 10 years. I'd love to be able to do that. That scares the hell out of most people at Unilever. I'm not going to be allowed to do that for a few more years yet. But we're building up this kind of ability to actually expose that stuff. Because for me, action planning shouldn't be at the end of the survey. I don't want action planning at the end of the survey. What I want is, I think there's something wrong with my team 6 months later. I'm going to go and have a look at what they're saying before I go ask them. Let me guide myself with some of the data there. So we really want to try and expose a lot more of this information to people so they can look through it. And my vision will be everyone, but I don't think I'll get there for a while yet. Any other questions at all? Cool. And then there was two more at the back.
So basically, just to follow up on that, I guess who has the data at the moment? Who is looking at the reports? Is it just going to?
So in terms of like all the, if you like, the quantitative stuff, everybody can have access to it. I mean, only in the anonymized 8-person groups, all that kind of stuff. Line managers, everyone else gets access to the comments, but kind of for their areas, if you like, right? And we would, we'd be quite happy to give it to anybody, but we haven't made that jump of kind of just making it readily available. So it's not hidden. In terms of like the data science group, we're very, very tight on who has access to the raw stuff, obviously. But yeah.
Hi. Are you surveying at different points of employees' kind of life cycles as well? So like an onboarding survey?
So we kind of don't. I mean, we have an exit survey, and as Nikki said, we don't love the results. We don't love the structure of it. But actually, the beauty of this is that we can capture those employee life cycle points just through the regularity of the surveying, right? Because we're surveying people every month as well. So although it's only a sample, we haven't maybe got everybody that just joined, actually we're able to just put that demographic cut over the data. So I can tell you what our joiners have thought at like 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 month, 5 months, 6 months in. I can tell you what a leaver felt a month before they told us they were going to resign, right? So we don't do it, it's not triggered by, if you like, but it is analyzed by those kind of points in an employee's life cycle. So I can also tell you what someone thought before a pay rise and after a pay rise, for example. Not the same individual necessarily, but we can, so yes, sort of. Ish, yeah.
And secondly, if I may,
Yeah.
what tool do you use? You said you bought a...
So we use a tool called Perception from Ultimate Software. It's got some great parts, got some not so great parts, but it works for us at the moment.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you for sharing that. A big part of my question was just answered, but I do have another one in the backup. So after you've moved into the in-house solution, when you bought that Perceptor tool, you mentioned that you have fewer questions and they're shorter, it takes under 2 minutes. And also you mentioned that you only use 30 to 40% of the population because that's a representative sample. Did I misunderstand that? Or
No, that's absolutely right. So for our annual survey, we put about 30 to 40% of the population through it, totally randomly selected. But then the other 70 to 60%, we didn't want them left out. So they're the people that get that get the pulse survey. So we spread them out through the year, they get a pulse. And the data scientists spent a lot of time for us working out how do we do the sampling in the right way so that we didn't have an unrepresentative month at a particular time.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I'm going to be super and ask another question. The people who you survey fully, your representative sample, and the people who you don't survey, and they can do whatever, is there a difference? Do you find a difference in the...
Well, we don't ask them exactly the same questions because we want the pulse one to be shorter. But no, what we tend to find, and we've done quite a lot of research on this, is like in terms of the pros and the cons and the advice to management, it kind of stays the same, it trends over time. In terms of the other questions where we do have alignment, like we ask line manager, obviously that one's very local to local, but you don't see it, it's very dependent on your line manager, right? But we don't see any massive average differences. And one of the things that we're starting to sneak in is actually putting the people that were in the main survey through the sample. Just don't tell anyone in our HR leadership team, they don't think we're doing it yet. But we're starting to do the whole population through the monthly samples as well, so that we can compare them. But we make sure that we don't hit them like the same month or the month after. And it's one of the beauties of actually bringing the tools in. I don't know if you guys have survey fatigue. I don't actually believe in survey fatigue, but senior managers do. And they hate the fact that, my team got like 10 surveys this month. So by bringing all the surveys onto our platform, what we've been able to do is actually we calendar them. So when like the guys from legal want to survey everyone, we make sure that their sample doesn't hit our sample in the month that it goes out. And we calendar stuff around it. So that when you get a complaint, it's brilliant because you get a complaint saying, 2 surveys came out. We go, yeah, the other one wasn't with us. Right, thank you for telling us where that is, and we'll drag that in as well. And all that data then pours into our data warehouse, which is great.
I wondered if you have like a favorite like testimony or story, if you say so, like anything that came out of what you found. Like, do you have a team where like a line manager actually talked to you and said, you know, these are the changes I made on the back of what you handed to me? Like,
Ooh, interesting.
You know, do you have anything?
I've got one from the CEO. It's probably not a nice one, but the CEO said to us, and I think, my God, we were just about to give them the award as the best team. No chance. Which was quite interesting. And then I got in loads of trouble a few weeks later because I had a request from the CEO's office where I was told, do not tell anybody else that we're asking you for this. And it was the 6 teams that were going up for an award, and he wanted to know what the people actually thought of the teams. And then, of course, we sent the data out, and then, of course, it leaked, right, because he told someone, and we got everyone coming back down, like, did you cut it like that? But no, so we've had that. So it does have a real impact. And similarly, we've had, like, some of our change programs where we saw a huge change. I mean, like, kind of astronomic, where we were able to show that the change program just had not landed in a particular area. And the change team knew this, but they also were getting too much resistance on the ground. But by being able to give the view that it hasn't changed, and then being told by the local GM, yeah, it's getting better, being able to say, no, it isn't, actually enabled them to then go in and actually really hands-on help to make it happen. And then we saw the change. And so the change leader for that was really, really happy that we'd not only been able to do it, but that we'd been able to then support him the whole way through in showing how it was changing and how the effect was coming through. Does that help? Cool. Any others, or are we done? Yeah, go on.
So you answered it a little bit around change management, but what's really interesting is for the different results, it can be around benefits or leave or something that's happening with the team. So once you have the results and the direct managers have them too, who's accountable for that change? Is it the direct manager? Is it sometimes the people team? How do you run? Because of course you expect a change.
Yeah, so it's a bit, so it kind of depends on the level, right? So you expect the direct manager to be making changes on some areas, right? But on other areas, it's something that has to be kind of company-wide. And that's why I think the analysis we did on which dimension counts the most was so important. So we do action planning on stuff that's kind of wider at a markets level, and they're accountable for delivering it. And then the much more local stuff is something that managers are held accountable for, but not held accountable for in terms of, someone looking over their shoulder, but they hold themselves accountable and their line managers are holding them accountable for that. So it's a real mix. And it is different, right? Because you don't get your whole team in one go. So you're getting your team, but over a whole year, because only 30% of my team might have been in the main sample. So I might not get results straight away. I might have to wait 2 more months until enough of my people have been through it, and then I get my result, and now it starts rolling as new people get added. So it's constantly kind of evolving and changing over time. Cool. Okay. Oh, I think there's one more behind you.
yeah. If we still have time, then perfect. So I guess another question is, how do you think people perceive you and your team and what you do, and how hungry are people outside who have no insight and knowledge of really what your team is doing in a day-to-day? Like, how hungry are people for the stuff that you can provide?
So it's a really good question. So if I think about like our biggest initiative at the moment is a major company-wide digital initiative. That team are beating down our door daily, asking for additional surveys, asking for additional questions to be inserted in the set. And one of the nice things about our rolling survey is it's got so few questions that I'm happy to add 1 or 2 every month and then take some out so that we can roll them through. So we get those guys beating us on our door constantly for not just for more questions and more data, but deeper analysis on what we already have. You know, we just recruited all these people over here. What do they actually think? Tell us. In terms of kind of then HR are very aware of what we do, and we get an awful lot of requests for like, can I have it cut in a different way? Can you demonstrate that this actually correlates with sales? Like, tell me about this leader that we're thinking about promoting. What have their people thought of them over the last few years, which we can now do quite easily because we've got the history. So we get that a lot. I think in terms of like the average line manager, we can definitely do more. So there are some that are, you know, this is what they really, really care about and they're desperate to have it. And there are others that are less so. And then that comes down to kind of the leadership above them and how much passion those leaders show for it. So, yeah.
Are there any last questions? We only have 2 minutes to get to the other session, but I want to make sure we got to everyone. One more.
Thank you. Love the simplicity of the model. Also love the fact that you're doing a lot in-house.
Yeah.
You're kind of breaking the model of some of these traditional survey companies, I think.
Yes.
Their services, their unique selling proposition is quite often that you bench your results against a set of other companies. So I was wondering, in your approach, is there at any given time, on today or in the future, will you be benching some of your outcomes with other companies?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did is because we can detect quite a strong correlation with our Glassdoor scores, we actually use Glassdoor as a bit of a benchmark for us. And that's actually really interesting because in our industry, you know, you could have read in the FT yesterday, the people disrupting us aren't Nestle, they're Halo Top, right? They're not L'Oreal, they're a small company. All those small companies are on Glassdoor. So now I can benchmark our North American ice cream unit against the local competitor that they are scared about the most. So actually, rather than those benchmarks where I'm never sure who the companies were, I'm never sure if it's actually my industry, and actually, is it the right cut now anyway? Because I ain't that worried about them. I'm more worried about these guys. And so Glassdoor gives us some of that. Now, there's massive concerns about that because some companies manipulate their Glassdoor. I know of one company where there's a huge jump where they just asked all their best employees to fill it in and nobody else. But by and large, that gives us enough that our senior leaders are happy. So, and it's free. So I like that. Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Cheers. Thank you.